This video is just about what I consider to be the most important thing in the universe, and that is humans learning certain things at certain times to overcome obstacles to our future existence. One of the biggest ones currently is that we don't understand how to read the symbols of the universe, what the universe has been saying to us like over and over and over again, everywhere. And so I just wanted to say that my 2003 book, the textbook of the universe, The Genetic Ascent to God, and a 1994 paper I sent to Brain and Cognition, which they liked, but they said to add in more original research, which at the time there was none. So it kind of like stopped me from going that route. I tried to talk about it when I was in graduate school and how the assumptions that people had about the brain were wrong, that there were this whole assumption of the idea of looking for spots in the brain was wrong. And why? Because every brain spot in the brain is defined by every other spot. So by artificially looking at each spot and saying this is a spot for reward or this and that is completely missing the way that the brain and reality itself works. So I left school and wrote the book because there was nobody working on this stuff back then. I left school, that was back in 1996, and then my two kids were born, so it took me a long time to finally write it. I'd written a lot of the notes in most of the book before that, but I finally got it in book form in 2003. We moved back in with my parents, which sucked, but you know, it's like we're adults, we had our own house and kids, and moving with your parents, you can imagine, caused a lot of tumult on both sides. And I want to take this opportunity to apologize to my children and my parents for the whole fiasco. But I did eventually write the book, get it printed, and then I traveled around the world for a while, presenting posters and things at like the International Society for the Scientific Investigation of Consciousness, at the Tour de Science of Consciousness convention in Tucson, and that was like kind of a synchronicity when that started, because back when I was an undergraduate, that's all I could think about. I taught myself neuroscience in a school that really didn't have a neuroscience component or a biopsychology department or anything. So I just spent time in the library, taught myself neuroscience. That's how I got into graduate school at Emory University in behavioral neuroscience and evolutionary psychology, which was one of the best experiences of my life, because as I kept going through, I was like, no, I'm right. Oh my God. No one does know what's going on here. You always think that people in these places, I imagine them wearing white robes, laurel wreaths, and mist coming out over marble floors. Well, they did have marble floors. Gotta give them that. It was a really cool place, but in some places, but marble buildings. But anyway, I had to write the book myself, and I traveled around, and everyone I talked to seemed like they liked it, but they were trying to find some category to put me in. So that one lady I talked to, I remember, was memorable because it kind of summed up what just about everybody was doing, and that was, they let me talk long enough to figure out which of the available categories I fit into, which I did not. So they didn't understand what I was saying. As soon as they did that, I knew they didn't understand. Like this lady goes, you're a mystic. And I'm like, yeah, okay. A lot of mystics did talk about what I was saying in symbolic form, but I taught experimental methodology. I love science. I was trying to get some traction on these issues. So like, I did know about synchronicity back then. It wasn't a big thing that people were looking at. Like when I started noticing synchronicities and started thinking that they were key to understanding what's really going on in the universe, a little ways after that is when the book, the Celestine Prophecy came out, and that in itself, when I found it, was a synchronicity for me. So many things happened like that. I found out some other books at the time. There were 2 or 3 other books. Paul Davies wrote one, another guy, but that came out, and I was like, great, it's starting to come out, cool. So I tried with these papers, I tried to show how introspective investigations of the experience of consciousness and its features and the experience of meaning could show us basically what consciousness was. So the meaning of synchronicities obviously was like the best case because it was outside the realm of normal accepted meanings, which tend to get in the way of new meanings and ideas, is perfect, you know. So I said that we should investigate synchronicities, we should rank them by how many elements are related, all this kind of stuff. Now, there's a guy, Gary Schwartz at University of Arizona. He has done that and shown that it would take many times the age of the universe for normal probabilities to give rise to some of the super synchronicities that are linked in chains together, which is what I talk about in my book. There were like chains of synchronicities I talk about and how unlikely they are. You could just look at it and know how unlikely it is. So he showed that. And so since then I've realized I actually know how the universe came about, what probability is, what the two features of time are, like going both directions, like the physics show us that time travels in one way, the all the equations of like the laws for entropy and things like that work equally well in both directions, and why that is, like the physical equations do. So it's almost like the equations show us there's another direction to time behind ours. And so when I was writing my papers, like the paper I sent to Brain and Cognition was called Glial Cells, and then it was the missing dark matter of the mind and a question mark, because they seem like they are symbolically in the right place in the brain. And I think that's where to solve the problem of consciousness and how we get meaning and stuff. So I wrote to Francis Crick about, and it was funny because that was a synchronicity in itself. He sent me back a letter that said, "You'll be amused to know that when I was reading your paper, it was all on meaning and how you can't explain meaning at all without going beyond time and space. It just can't. Or consciousness. And meaning is like the most important thing to consciousness. When something's really, really meaningful, it stands out in consciousness. You become very conscious of it. When you become conscious of meaning, you start seeing that everywhere. You know, once something's meaningful to you, you start seeing it all over and stuff. And it starts to be something that everything revolves around. So you can see where this leads up to. And I have a concept of the logos echo, where things on a microcosm are reflected in the macrocosm. So a lot of things happened around that idea too, like the Toyota Echo came out during that time. Of course, the Amazon Echo and things like that. Echo, echo this, echo that. So I thought that was a really cool synchronicity too. But what I'm trying to say is that these things all point to something bigger. Like there's something much bigger that even humans symbolize. And you have to like get rid of your ego. And like, I know they said that the Earth is not the center of the universe anymore, but that's one thing. But if you are a consciousness and everywhere you look, it looks like everything's related to you, it's hard to get rid of that center of the universe and realize that the center of the universe that's in you is the center everywhere in all meaning and beyond time and space and beyond your own lifetime. So that's like the hardest thing. And so anyway, to make a long story short, I do understand reality and how it works if people would just listen to me. So since 2003, there's been 14 major books that have come out, each doing one aspect of the theory that leads up to what I tried to say in my book, in my posters, in my paper, my posters after the book, and even today, figuring out even more. There's so much more to it that people aren't even talking about, but at all. It's just, I totally know how the universe works and how it relates to the brain, and I'll tell you why. It's because the key thing is to understand that this is an information structure. It's a teaching machine, and people kind of got turned off to teaching machines because the B.F. Skinner put his daughter in one, things like that. But he was a poet before he became a psychologist, and poetry is not just for poets. Poetry can be the impetus for ideas for scientists, for very good reasons that science can show us. So the poetic idea of putting your daughter in a teaching machine, your own daughter, if you take that idea, bring it to another level. This is the logos echo I'm talking about, because these things echo on scales, all right? Good way to conceptualize it is like a spiral shape. If you have a spiral made from one line, it goes all the way to the center like that. You have a spiral. Then you look anywhere on the spiral in a small way, like one piece of the spiral, it just looks like parallel lines. Oh, these things, right here there's a line, and this one looks like that one. They look separate and parallel. But the reason they look that way is because ultimately, with the highest view, it's all one thing, wound around to look like a lot of separate parallel things, right? It echoes from the constricted human view. This is what I was trying to say in my book. It's how reality looks. It's the nature of the information laws of the universe. I say that there are laws of the universe, information laws, and how information has to conform in the universe in order for the universe to exist. It's like anthropic cosmology again. That our brains are not an accident. They're an integral part of bringing the universe into existence in the long run. And it's only because we look at time in one direction. It's our little covered bridge we travel down so we don't freak out and ruin everything. It protects us as much as it protects the universe and stuff, because we would freak and not get there. So we can only see certain things. And so now it's time for this larger view to come out. And I think that's a reason for a lot of the upheavals and changes, including the rise of science and computers in the last few hundred years, is for this to come out. And I think it echoes down history in the form of the pyramids and the different things that we can learn from. These are all things we can learn from, and we can learn from the entire natural world. Like I said, it's a teaching machine, and I can tell you what we're supposed to learn from each of the animals. Like the things E.O. Wilson says about a superorganism are very germane to this idea. E.O. Wilson's one of my favorite people of all time, don't get me started. But you can learn about what humans are by watching ants. Not because they're the same thing, but because they're an echo, this logos echo thing. They're like a piece of a hologram. If you look at the universe as a hologram that's been split up into all these different pieces, another way to look at it, it's like a spiral thing too, then you'll see that each one of them is like a rarefied example of the same overall theme. It's almost like the words went out of the Creator's mouth into the universe. All living things try to conform to what the Creator was saying to a lesser and greater degree. They're all echoes of this one thing, logos echo. Life is an echo down the generations, down through history to the beginning. And what you can see is that the physical universe also echoed the same patterns and things as ants. Sounds weird, but it's true. And then you have anthropic cosmology, which shows that it was leading to us eventually, because the universe was building us. But in building us, it had to leave either the fossil record or mark of what had been so that we can learn. And that learning is the creation of the universe in the future. Sounds weird. But when you eliminate all the possibilities that can't be, what remains is what has to be. That's what I did a long time ago. This is why I'm saying, people, please listen to me. Read my book. I'm going to revise it because now, like I said, I have at least 14 more books. There's a bunch of other ones too, but there's at least 14 more books. I really love Gary Schwartz's Super Synchronicity because it actually uses science and computers, which I said we should use on Synchronicities because that would be the key. He's doing it. There you go. Just look at that. It proves what I'm trying to say in my book. That's one thing that came out of my book. There's so many things in there. I'm not even kidding, people. I know I look ridiculous. One guy called me a freak. He's like, a freak too, in my second video or whatever, but I'm not going to make any excuses for myself. I don't have an ego like people normally say you do, like a self-important combativeness. It's probably one of the reasons for why people don't listen to me, because I'm like not motivated by external things, just by knowledge. I sit there and I live in my car right now. In my car, reading books, listening to things. That's all I do. I just love learning. I was parked under a tree the other day and I was watching a bee go around a tree. I'm like, why is it there? There's no flowers. Then I realized there's tiny little flowers. I took this little bee to show me the flowers that the tree was putting out. And in that moment, I realized a tree is a holy thing. It's teaching us things. If you look at a tree and try to imagine what it's like to be a tree, from inside of the soul of a tree, you realize what it's doing. What it's doing is, it's putting out flowers every spring into the darkness, because the tree can't see like you and I do. It can't detect light, but it does use light. I mean, it does detect light in the sense of getting all of its power and life force from light and moving towards it. Its roots are in the dark earth, and the top is up in the sun, and that's kind of like an allegory for the evolution of life too. I could show you all the different aspects of the meaning of just a tree, and it can explain all of life. But for the purposes of what I want to tell you right now is that I was parked under this tree. I woke up in the morning, the sun was coming up, and these bees were lit up, and the little leaves were glowing. And I started watching the bees, and they went to these little branches. It looked like how, you know, when grapes come off of a vine, there's just a little stem left. It looked like that. But then I looked closer and there was little tiny flowers, and the bees were getting nectar from it. I realized there was flowers in the trees. The bees showed me that. The bees taught me something that morning. And we can learn from bees, we can learn from ants and everything on the earth. It's just beautiful the way it works together. And for some reason, I can see how it all works together and what it's supposed to be showing us. I read about that in my book, The Key to Learning. There's keys. You put the key in your head, and then you can unlock what the universe is trying to teach us. So when I saw this tree and these bees, I realized that, you know, in Tibet, they're above the tree line, so they don't see the trees but as much. I'm sure they know what they are and stuff, but I love their prayer flags. I used to hang them above my desk when I was writing the book and stuff. And then I realized that that's what trees do. Trees pray. They pray to the darkness. They send out prayer flags. Every spring, they send out prayer flags to the gods of reproduction and existence. They give a sacrifice of some of their sap, which they make into a high energy substance that they put in their flowers. They open their flowers, or like prayer flags, into the void. A tree doesn't know color. It doesn't know what's happening out there, but it does do this thing regardless. It responds, and it builds something beautiful. It becomes a living word, the living word. And the way it becomes a living word is when we see it and what it's doing. It teaches us. So we're not separate from trees, people. I'm trying to tell you these things. We're not separate from the universe. It sends out its prayer flags into the void, and the tickle of tiny wings and feet come and take the offering to its gods. And then they go with it and go to another tree, and they spread the pollen, and it reproduces. So trees that have prayer flags are the ones that survive. What are prayer flags? They're beautiful things because they symbolize what humans do. We have to have faith and hope. When you have hope, you can overcome every obstacle. And if you have faith, you can get through anything. So I just wanted to say that I just wish people would, understand what I'm trying to say. I'm going to rewrite my original 2003 book using these 14 books in the next year or so, and then I'll re-release it and we'll see what happens. I'm also going to contact these 14 authors and tell them about my books. Maybe I'll send them a copy. I still have a box of them. I think there's 25 in a box. I'm going to send the books out, try one more time. I'll ask for their advice, ask them how I should revise it and integrate what they're doing and stuff. We'll see if we can get this thing going, because I don't have much time left on the earth. I'm getting older, and I have so much to say. It's like this freaking pressure inside of me. Sometimes I feel like my head's gonna explode. But I've really pretty much sacrificed my whole life. I didn't have friends as a kid. I'm transgender too. I think being transgender was a miracle because it helped me see things very differently and be isolated, to look at things from afar. Like all through high school, I just spent my lunch periods in the library reading, and I just started, it's like Tesla said, be alone if you want to be creative and get ideas. That's all I did. And I felt unloved as a kid by the world, which can be upsetting, but for some reason I loved the world anyway. It's very complicated what happened and why I was like that, but in the end it's like perfection. And if you look back at all the pain of the world, I know where the pain and suffering comes from. People are like, I don't have faith or hope. There's too much pain and suffering in the world. Why would God do that? It's like, God is not doing that. I know what that is. I know what evil is. I know what the pain and suffering is. I know why probability exists like it does, and what was here before the universe. And I can tell you what was here before. It's kind of, I had to put it in human terms, but I know what was here before the universe. And there's literally no doubt. And I can show you, we can show experimentally, like this Gary Schwartz stuff, what it is. And it's going to be something weird. It's not going to be like cyclotrons and things you'd expect, but I will show you, and that's why we have computers. So that's all for now. Happy 2020. I'm in Palmdale right now, in front of the Planet Fitness, where I work out and shower I have very little money left. We'll see what happens. I'm trying to have faith and hope. But this is my car. Okay, so I know I mentioned how horrible I look already, but I haven't showered in a few days, maybe more than a few days, and I didn't shave today or put any makeup on, but I just need to say one more thing, and that is, there are just so many people that I know and that I've read, like Susan Blackmore, whose Meme Machine book was one of those things that came out at the right time for me too. Then Jordan Peterson's book, probably one of my top 5 books of all time, Maps of Meaning. I was one of the first people to read it. At the time, there were like 5 reviews online. It was back in 2000 or 2001, I think, and the other reviews were like from his graduate students. They were like, great class, cool book, you know. So I was like, I'm gonna do a serious review. So I did, and but then I met him. Well, the way I found out about the book is I met him at one of the at the Tucson conference. And when I walked up, he was just some guy. Nobody really knew who he was. He was standing in front of a poster. I have a picture of me with him in front of the poster. It's really cool because he had this picture of like a surfer. That's what it was me. He had like this hero figure inside of an Ouroboros dragon, and his whole thing was, you know, like the dragon of chaos, and how you leave the castle and go out in the dragon of chaos, and you save the maiden, which symbolizes bringing something new into existence, creative energy and stuff, and overcoming fear and ego, death, ideas and things. And he was talking about all these different religions, and I knew I had been long interested in the different religions, and because there was such a like, I could tell behind the symbols. I'm really good at metaphors and analogies, and that's how I became a member of Mensa, because the Miller Analogies test, I took it because I was like, geez, what's the limit of understanding metaphors? But I was like in the top 1%, plus I'm extremely motivated to do so and buy metaphors and analogies and things like that. I see symbolism everywhere, and not everybody does, so it's kind of a cool thing. But in that regard, I looked at all the world religions as being, to me, they seem like they're saying the same things. Like, people don't understand that when I look at a cathedral and I see light streaming in through a stained glass window, I see Buddhism. And it's because the metaphor of that, we're inside of this great cathedral universe, and through our senses and the things we see this light streaming in, and it seems like all these different colors and separate things. But from outside the cathedral that we are in, when we worship and do these things, outside there's a sun and white light, which has all the colors. It's all one, and it's kind of like a beautiful illusion, but it also teaches you that light comes through everything in a lot of different ways, you know. So in a way, the stained glass window shows us that all of the religions are like that. The light comes through them in different ways. Or to use the parable, the Hindu, I think it's Hindu, parable of the blind man and the elephant is perfect. I just love that one. Depending on where you're at, these things can seem different, but if you understand the key to analogy and metaphor, which is part of the information structure of the universe I talk about in my book, I call it a logos echo, just because it makes it more simple to understand. And then I use a spiral, like spirals, to illustrate it, like spirals the Southwest Indians drew, which I was really surprised and really joyful to find that they use that as one of their symbols in their religion too, and that when they dug wells down to water, they used a spiral walkway to go down to the water level. I think that's where it comes from. I don't really know, but for sure, I don't think anyone does, but they're on the petroglyphs out there. There's been spirals in a lot of different religions, but anyway, I just want to say that Jordan Peterson's stuff, when I started talking to him, it was like I found a long lost brother, because he was thinking about one huge aspect of what I've studied to come to my ideas. And like early on in my studies, back when I was an undergraduate, like in the 80s, one of the first books I ever bought along those lines was Jung's book, Man and His Symbols. It was like this big picture book, and it explained symbols and things. which I thought was awesome. It just fit my personality perfectly. So when I started talking to Jordan Peterson, it was like beyond just meeting a long-lost brother. I felt like we had like the same brain almost. It was so synchronistic, and like we thought so alike about everything. He just spoke about everything that I heuristically had surmised in my mind. He just spoke the words, and so it was really cool. But when I met him, I had a t-shirt on. That's the reason I met him. It's really dumb. It was a synchronicity. I had a t-shirt that had a surfer coming through a wave, because I was into surfing back then. I still like to surf, but he's in the middle of this wave, and the head of the wave was stylized into like a Japanese dragon thing, and it looked exactly like the head on his poster. So I was like, and there was a guy coming through, so I was like, hey, look, Jordan. I was like, hey, look at this. I like your poster. And then we just started talking, and then I was like, so tell me what's going on here. And I was like, whoa, holy crap. And that's why I got his book and read it and did the review and everything. And I'm so glad he's famous now. He just absolutely deserves it. All that he's been through and the work he's put in. But anyways, I found a long-lost brother. And one thing he taught me about that I didn't know that was extremely valuable was about the Epic of Gilgamesh, the earliest known writing that we have from cuneiform tablets from 5,000 years ago, and searching for the flower of immortality. And then I just unpacked that metaphor in my book into all the things of the modern world and stuff. And it's like the basic, most fundamental metaphor, searching for that flower of immortality. It's like behind science and religion, because science, the way I talk about it in my book, is that science looks through fleeting examples of things for a pattern behind the fleeting, the eternal pattern behind the fleeting. And it's what religions do. We want to know what the eternal patterns are behind the things that happen in everyday life, and what is behind the veil or Maya, the illusion. How can we make a mind that understands the universe and the patterns that gave rise to it, like Om Mani Padme Hum. Sorry, I got a headache. I haven't get much sleep. It's hard to sleep in the car, and then I get headaches. It's getting really bad when I was a kid, but not so much anymore. So anyway, I just wanted to mention Jordan Peterson too. There's just so many people, I just can't mention them all. If I haven't said a name, it's not because I haven't read their stuff or things, whatever. But I found lately that even if I haven't read somebody's stuff, I understand it. I know what they're talking about. It's like once you get to a point, you read so many books that you realize, none of them really surprised me or had surprised me. My wife pointed that out. My ex-wife, actually, like when I was transgender, I got a divorce. That's one lady in my car right now. But she is awesome because she helped me so many different ways. Like, eventually to figure out that I was transgender. But she said one time, "Have you ever read anything that surprised you?" And I was like, "Well, you're right. No, I haven't." It's almost like I'm trying to figure out where humanity is, and then extend or elaborate on whatever they got. It's like. But I see symbolism everywhere back through history. It's almost like a completely different way of looking at things. It's like when you read a book when you're a kid, you grow up, read it again, it's like a different book. Well, that's how the world is to me. So it's difficult for me sometimes to understand what people don't understand in what I'm saying. So if anything I'm saying doesn't make sense, or you're thinking, hey, he's wrong, or she's wrong, or whatever, however you see me, I don't know, it's kind of weird. I don't care, pronouns, whatever you want to use, but it's kind of ironic that Jordan Peterson got into that pronoun issue, and I agree with his position on it, by the way. Free speech trumps everything. I didn't mean to say the word Trump. I really don't care about politics at all. So, that's all I was going to say. Just that kind of stuff, but I forgot to put that in there. So, that's it. Thank you. Happy 2020. So yeah, when you read enough books, which was my original point, might as well bring closure on that. It's almost like they all become the same book. In the end, it's like a shattered hologram that you've pieced together so that the meaning that you see in the book, like I've had this phenomenon a bunch of times where I'm reading a book and I know what they're going to say on the next page. I know what the example is going to be, and then there it is on the next page. It's like, it becomes so synchronistic, like the actual books that come out become synchronistic. It's like once you get to the point where you understand, like, I guess that flower of immortality, it's like the elephant or something, is the best way to describe it. It's like what people probably thought of as enlightenment and experience in different ways. Sometimes they're experiencing the echo of enlightenment coming down through the generations or history or something, or an enlightenment. I think there's like different levels of those things, but at some point, if you learn enough, then the meaning of books becomes like unified. It's almost like you've walked outside. You've looked around the other side of the stained glass windows and realized there's a white light streaming through them that we see, and all these other things is a singular light. So to me, it's meaningful that, you know, we're in a solar system with a single sun and things like that, and that's how the universe is. But I talk about all that kind of stuff in my book. But you read enough books, the point I'm trying to make is you read enough books and they all seem like they're saying the same thing in different ways, just like the different religions. And then you start looking at different peoples, you know, like the different races and different religions and even the different organisms, and you stop seeing them as so separate anymore. Like, you just see life. Like in my book, I talk about it being like a dragon through time. Its head is in the now, so to speak, but all of history, if you take away the dimension of time, you know, it's like one big thing through history. It's all the same. And like people can look back and say, oh, we had a common ancestor and things like that, but it's more than that. It's like we are just the one thing, or life. You know, it's like spreading out into the universe to understand itself. It's almost like consciousness. The pressure of creative consciousness wants to know who it is. And this is the things I need to talk about, that people need to know, because it's not just some pie in the sky religious stuff, but it's important to the future of the universe. And to think that people, you know, had wars that lasted 100 years or more, 1,000 years, or conflicts over religion into the future, I think this is something that is very important. I think it's not something that didn't have a basis that science can't talk about or understand. Even if the method of science is not amenable to understanding meaning, we can learn things about meaning with science. And the way I look at the universe is that we can look at the science as getting the grammar and vocabulary of the universe right. I don't think that it's an accident that the periodic table shows us that the universe is constructed with a literal alphabet you can put into a table of a finite number of chemicals that can be combined in different ways to make different things, just like the letters in our Western alphabets can be combined in different ways to make different words, and then those can make, you know, paragraphs, and then meaning ascends from there. And those things aren't an accident. I talk about the structure of meaning and the structure of information in the universe, which echoes the structure of information in our writing. So instead of looking at the writing and reading it, if you look at the structure of how meaning is built, it's the way it's built in the universe, same way. Only the universe uses three-dimensional structure and color and form to poetically say things. And you can read it. It's like, look at the book, you can read it, just like a book. It is a book. So just want to get that point across, that we're a shattered hologram, basically. And when you look at the universe, you're reading the books, the pieces, putting the pieces back together. And when you put it all together, you get the white light from the source. And you understand where we're headed. And it's an amazing thing, and religions are not wrong. So, just had to put that part in there and emphasize it. And that's it.